strategy session. I am your host for this evening, Reed Galen. Joining me tonight, the whole gang, finally back in one place. Stuart Stevens, Rick Wilson, Joe Trippi, all distinguished individuals in their own rights. Guys, let's get to it quickly. Right before we went on air, it was announced that Enrico Tarrio, head of the Proud Boys, had been sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for his role in the January 6th insurrection. I think we have a few of the pictures he took, a few of the folks he took pictures with. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, my drinking buddy Ted Cruz, Dan Crenshaw, Ramon, Cokie and the Bear here, and then Rick Scott. So guys, this is turn, but they turn slowly. Rick,
listen, this guy was an egregious part of the white nationalist movement that the Proud Boys are defined by. And he was, the night before they were attacking black churches in D.C., the same day, the day before he was invited to the White House. This guy is the biggest fish in the January 6th sentencing from the Proud Boys so far. He will not be the last. This is again, you're right, Reed, the justice moves slowly, but it is a very satisfying moment to see this little jumped up scum 22 years in a federal pen. I suspect by the time he gets done, he will be a less proud middle-aged dude who will regret getting in bed with Roger Stone and the rest of this revolutionary cohort that thought they were going to overturn a free and fair election. I could not be happier.
So just as a reminder, guys, the Proud Boys was this sort of weird drinking club. They wore yellow polo shirts and kilts, and they were this guy Gavin McInnes, a Canadian dude who wanted to talk about this Western chauvinism. A really strange group, another sort of weird incel band, right? They were all,
Right.
and they got radicalized over the. Remember, Trump told them famously, Stuart, in 2020,
stand by.
Stand back and stand by. So, what do you take of this?
Look, I think that isn't the race going to be about who's going to get elected to pardon him? Isn't what that Trump's going to? So, I mean, that's the stakes. You're either going to have a guy. This is not a normal election. You're going to have a guy who's going to spend 22 years at least in federal pen, or he's going to be pardoned by the next president. So, I mean, that's really it. Republicans who are supporting Trump or supporting DeSantis or they are supporting pardoning a guy who was just sentenced to 22 years. I mean, so much for the Law and Order Party. But these Republicans leaders are going to support him. They should be answering for that. Why do you want to pardon this guy?
So Joe, I interviewed a guy named Andy Campbell. He wrote this great book called "We Are Proud Boys." And when I interviewed him for the Lincoln Project podcast, he used Enrico Tarrio as the way that he described how you should interview MAGA or right-wing people. He said, Enrico Tarrio does nothing but lie. That's all he does. And so when I would write about him, I would say, I'm about to quote Enrico Tarrio. Here's his quote. Why can't other people do that?
Well, I mean, look, we need more of that. We need reporters who do that. It's just that's what's wrong with the whole coverage of this stuff. But the thing that I think, look at those pictures. I mean, I know we tonight.
Sam, go ahead and put them back up if we can.
But the level, not just Trump saying stand back and stand by, but the level of this guy being enabled and fed and stroked, and I mean stroked, by Rick Scott, senators and congressmen who emboldened him, and with Trump, fanning the flames, they all are culpable. Every single one of the Republican Party who aided and abetted this guy and Proud Boys exactly what they wanted to hear and putting them up on the platforms and taking pictures with them is just that's the party you're voting for. That's what this is about. It is about democracy and saving it from these. I mean, just punks. I mean, absolute punks that
Yeah.
were willing to take out this on January 6th, and the party, the members of Congress, the members of the Senate who aren't indicted yet. We don't know if any of them will be unindicted murders or. But they're the ones that are getting away with hiding behind what they did for people like this. It's just amazing to me.
So Rick, they sort of come around in the late, 20 teens. We
Sure.
saw that they had, I'm going to call it their high watermark, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, on January 6th. But now downstream of them, just this week in your home state of Florida, we see self-avowed Nazis, right? So
Yep.
these are many things. They are violent, they are antisocial, they are anti-democratic, not particularly well organized or particularly ideological. Now you
Right.
have people who have chosen their brand neo-Nazis,
Right.
and they are parading around Central Florida, and no one in the Republican Party, which is now the Trump, DeSantis, Ramaswamy Party, 85, if you believe in it, like, where does it go from here?
Reed, I've written and talked about this for a long time now, but Florida is a growing hotbed of Nazi, neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, and racial hate groups. And I'm not trying to be all Southern Poverty Law Center here, but this is a problem that is so expansive that it is estimated 60% of the people who work in the Florida Department of Corrections are connected to a white supremacist group. It is common up here in the North Florida area now for people to overtly talk about doing these rallies, neo-Nazi rallies, Klan rallies, race-based hatred, projecting swastikas on buildings. Here's the thing that really outrages me about this, Reed, and I lost my temper about it once today. I'm going to do it again, frankly. Ron DeSantis loses his goddamn mind when a university professor disagrees with him on something. Ron DeSantis will go and attack a grade school teacher who says, yeah, we ought to teach that kids might be gay. We ought to go ahead and treat people with dignity and respect. Ron DeSantis loses his shit with Disney because they oppose his heinous Don't Say Gay bill. Ron DeSantis attacks anyone who talks about his book burning and his book ban system he's put into place in Florida. He goes after any legislator who criticizes him in even the most weak way. He goes after everybody. The man's mouth never shuts up. His very campaign never stops calling people names. Do you know what they don't do? They don't attack the fucking Nazis that are marching in the streets in Florida. They don't attack the neo-Nazis who are assaulting people outside of synagogues in South Florida. They don't attack the white supremacist groups like the League of the South and the Klan in North Florida. I mean, this is the classic wedge you find yourself in. Is Ron DeSantis a Nazi? No. Does he even sympathize with Nazis? No. But you know what? He doesn't want to disrupt his base. He's adopted the Steve Bannon philosophy of no enemies to my right. And that philosophy means you're going to welcome those people into the party. You're going to welcome them into the process. You're going to mainstream them. You're going to mainline them. And you know what happens when that occurs? We're going to have 1933 jump up really fast. And it's not going to go well for the state or for the country. And yes, I am legitimately pissed about it. And I've had enough of Ron DeSantis's pussy bullshit of avoiding even for a second going, those people belong here. Those people do not belong on our streets. Those people should not be treated by anyone as a part of our politics. And yeah, I'm legitimately pissed off.
And now
Go ahead,
you have the U.S. Open, a guy singing "Do" and Uber Alles,
and Zeke Heil.
and Zig Heil, and you've got Elon Musk, uh, just basically, really rolling into this stuff too. It's because of the enabling of all this. It's because they won't take it on. It's because of exactly what Rick just said about DeSantis, you know, by like sort of like acting like it's not there and not taking it on and not
Right.
denouncing it. We're going to see
Rome
more of
and
it.
Goering and Himmler and Hitler didn't jump because people opposed them enough. They jumped into power because people didn't oppose them enough. And for all he wants to be the strong man and the tough guy, he's got to where he just won't come out and say the words.
So, Joe, I was watching the match last. You couldn't, when you're watching it, you couldn't hear. It was a German player that was
Right.
on the court, and he went right over to the chair and he said, "Did you hear that guy? It's absolutely unacceptable. That's not okay for that guy to say that." And it sort of rattled him, and everybody. But I
that's
made a
what Ron
joke on Threads.
DeSantis
I
should
said,
be doing.
I made a joke on Threads just to remind ourselves that there's no such thing as humor or irony on social media. I said, removed from the U.S. Open, and people are like, "Really?" No, not really. I was being sarcastic, but. Tell us about this because I interviewed Simon Rosenberg just a couple hours ago for the LP podcast, and he's made the same kind of point you did, which was after the fall of the Cold War, and he had maybe slightly different than you did after the fall of the Cold War, where the Southern strategy domestically were sort of two ideological pillars. That after the fall of the Soviet Union, they only had one pillar left, and now in your book, it was a lot of this stuff. And so you wrote that book in 2020?
2020, yeah.
Yeah. So, I
I
mean,
was overly
and you're,
optimistic.
how do you see it?
Well, look, race is the original sin of the modern Republican Party. Clear as can be. Keep going back. Eisenhower in 1956 got 39% of the black vote. 9%. Jackson for Nixon. Then you go to Goldwater. Goldwater opposes the Civil Rights Bill. He gets 7% of African Americans. Now, you could have made a case after the Civil Rights Bill passed that African Americans might come back to the party in some numbers because of shared values of faith or patriotism or entrepreneurship or family or something, but it didn't happen. So Trump gets 8% of the African American vote. So that's 1 point every 56 years. So do the math of how long it'll take you to get back to 30%. And, the country, we keep talking about how the country is becoming minority majority, but in a way it already is. For those who are now 16 years and under, the majority are non-white. Mm-hmm. And the Republican Party realizes this. 85% of Trump's coalition was white. And, when I worked in the Romney campaign, you could see that there were these detached white voters, low frequency, who would be motivated by any idea of, we're going to cut your taxes or economic or, stand up to Russia. They actually Russia. You had to go where Trump went. You had to go to the Muslim ban. You had to go to straight up racism. Mexicans are rapists. And, of course, in the Romney, people have a better sense of Romney now. It was never even discussed. But what I would have bet is that whatever you gained by getting those voters, you would have lost with college-educated Republicans. And that didn't happen it happened in 20. I mean, that was part of the mission of the Lincoln Project. And that really is the question, whether or not those voters are going to accept. And, we talk about Trump lower income voters, but the only economic group that supported Trump in 20 were those who make over $100,000 a year. So these are not impoverished, victims of China.
Right.
Right.
Not
They're not
overworked coal miners.
It's not their economic anxiety.
It's not economic
Even the
anxiety.
same group the same group that attacked on January 6th was
people who had the means to get there.
People could fly in and do all that stuff.
So, Joe, let me ask you this. So, let's turn it to just a second before we move on. So, Elon Musk is in a fight with the Anti-Defamation League. He's threatening to sue them for defamation. He's already in a fight with the Center for Countering Digital Hate for the same reason, which was, one, this free speech absolutist, this capitalist, olive is mad because these two organizations have shown a light on who his advertising is going to and what kind of messages it's sitting next to. And he said these people cost me 60% of my advertising revenue, and they're defaming me. So he doesn't really like free speech. He doesn't really like market forces, and he's happy to blame the Jews.
Yeah,
I mean,
these
that's
people are
the bottom
vicious.
line.
You know,
Good. I mean, take it to him. I mean, it's just he's just. I mean, what he's done, and I still can't believe the amount of the amount the government of the United States is still and has contracts with. It's just an amazing thing I mean, that he can get away with this stuff. Glad take on those advertisers. We should all be doing everything we can to make sure that the advertisers know exactly the garbage that they're. I think this suit helps do that because
And
I
look,
think we'll stay away from it.
look, I think 90% of this talk about a lawsuit against ADL and posturing.
I want to see the
Because,
discovery.
yeah, because the last thing he wants to do is discovery. Let's unblock Hitler fan 1488. And
Yeah.
these guys from Charlottesville make some good points. Yeah, they don't want to go down that road.
Well,
And
and there's also, the anti-slap stuff, right, which could come back to bite him, which is if he actually goes in and, does this and it gets tossed, then he's stuff. But I mean, it has taken a platform that we passed and we still use and turn it into, I mean, Twitter always had a real cesspool quality to it, right? Because people would go there to say things they wouldn't say elsewhere or say to their neighbors. Now it's almost unusable between the back end stuff that he's dismantled, this this trust and safety stuff he's gotten rid of, and now the stuff that he's just actively promoting.
I mean, I
And,
don't think
Linda
we can talk
Yaccarino,
about.
who's
Go ahead,
I
Stu,
don't
and then
think
you're
we can talk about how dangerous this is enough. I mean, he's out there blaming the Jews, and there are people saying Yale doesn't speak for the Jews. Well, when Hitler attacked Jewish bankers, they said, "Well, it's not about the Jews. It's just about the Jewish bankers."
right.
It is extraordinarily dangerous and subsidized by taxpayers, as
Right.
Joe said.
Absolutely. That's the craziest part of it.
So,
Go ahead,
all
Rick.
right, go ahead, Rick.
yeah, look, and here's the thing. Elon represents this tech bro demo in Hollywood, or in Silicon Valley, excuse me, really believes that all speech is equal and all speech is good. And, not all speech is equal and not all speech is good. You should ban it. But a private enterprise like Twitter or Facebook or Insta, at some point, that in some world, Section 230 gets a good hard look, and we stop treating these people like they're a neutral publisher and start looking at the affirmative actions and steps they have taken to empower and enable these people. Look, Twitter in 2016, 17, and hundreds of thousands of Nazi accounts and racist accounts and the troll farms that were driving those messages, because they knew they were bad for business. They knew they made the advertising on the platform less valuable. Elon, for whatever quixotic reason, thinks that the value to the platform and to the national political dialogue, and it's look, I'm not a billionaire and I can't explain the minds of billionaires, but he's lucky he doesn't have the Saudis come calling to collect their debt when this thing collapses with a bone saw and a wood chipper, because it's going to collapse if he keeps this up.
Look, to them, this is fine. I believe that they're totally okay because oil prices, they want to do everything they can to get their $2 billion investment back in the White House. All right, so let's talk about this, guys. Moving on. So it's crazy to think we're 14 months or so away from Election Day 2024 in November. Really a lot closer than that when it comes to voters who are going to start receiving, ballots in the mail, actually going to start, picking candidates. So, Rick, you wrote something on Substack about how you see next year. A little bit of a taste of what you were looking at.
It's an article called "The Rocket Sled," and it explains the story of why it's called the Rocket Sled. But we are on a track right now in this country, and millions of people don't on this track, but we're on it. We're not getting off of it. There's no magical solution. Trump is not going to end up in jail by November of 2024. All these people who believe that the lawsuits are going to be the thing that does it are wrong. Nobody from this Republican primary field, if you didn't pay attention to that debate last 2 weeks ago, the weak bunch of second tier, second rate, tryhards you've ever seen, they're not going to beat Trump. He's not going to get taken out by the established Republicans. They've already given up. All of this is leading towards the Biden-Trump fight. We say this all the time to our supporters, our friends, our donors, our political associates. Like, stop living in a fantasy world. And a lot of people in the Democratic side and the resistance and the pro-Biden side, they still believe coming from Fannie Willis or Jack Smith that's going to slap Trump in jail and he can't win after that. If you believe that's the case, you are living in a deluded fantasy world. And my worst, I've sort of talked to a couple of people about today, and it scared them as much as it scared me. I believe as the race clearly becomes Trump's primary, in order to give him legal protection, sometime in March, maybe late March of next year, they're going to say, well, the RNC is declaring Donald Trump as the nominee now, so he can say that and have the legal, a greater legal shield and a greater reason to say, oh, they're just persecuting me because I'm the Republican who can beat Joe Biden. I think there's a lot of bad stuff out there that people are undercounting and undervaluing, and it is in an article called The Rocket Sled, and it's substack.com.
So Joe, talking to someone earlier today, and in this context of impeaching Biden and this person, very smart person, said they've already committed January 6th, right? They've
Right.
already done this. So like anything not up to that line is totally within the bounds of normalcy.
Right.
Anything past that line is certainly within.
Right. No, and they're still. I've said this. We've all said it. The conspiracy continues. It's not stopped. It's still going, and it's happening every day. You had out, the federal court throwing out Alabama because it abused and didn't even like follow the Supreme Court, sending it back to them to say you have to have two African American majority districts in the state of Alabama. The legislature said, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, and that was a seat, by the way, when we did it, when the Supreme Court said, well, to handle it after the 2022 election, gave them, we're only holding on to they only have the House by 4.
Right.
With Sam,
Right.
they're keeping the seat warm for McCarthy, and this happened in other states. But even after the federal courts, Supreme Court said no, you got to do this, they said nah, not going to. Now, hopefully this in place to draw the lines and force the Alabama legislature, to have those two districts. But that stuff is going on, and a lot of people are not paying attention. I mean, it's happening, and it's happening in, with threats to election workers and everything else that they're doing out.
So and
Stuart,
we're seeing that in Wisconsin, where the state legislature is talking about getting rid of the Secretary of State, which is not an elected position there; it's an appointed position. Perhaps trying to figure unseat the newly elected Supreme Court justice, liberal Supreme Court justice that was just elevated in April, I believe. And so, yeah, as Joe says, like this is not an aberration anymore. This is the MO.
Well, look, in the book that's coming out next month that talked about called Conspiracy in America and talked about these 5 elements that are always present when a democracy into autocracy. And one of them is erecting a legal justification for it. And that is happening across the country. It's happening every weekend where they're meeting. Cleta Mitchell is out there, attorney, as I like to call her, is out there meeting with local elected officials, trying to get people to volunteer. They're trying to change laws. And it is being run in an overall effort by Leonard Leo, who ran the Federalist Society.
Yeah.
$1.6 billion, the largest
Yeah.
single contribution ever in American history. And they're very patient about this.
Yep.
And I think we should be scared to death about this because it's the inner happening that in part makes it so likely to happen.
Well, and then Rick, before you talk, in Georgia of all places,
Yeah.
center so much stuff where there's a board, that the legislature of Georgia, a couple of the crazier members say we're going to remove Fani Willis from her position. No less than the governor, Brian Kemp, a conservative Republican, but not a Trump. I'm not having anything to do with that. So there are a few, right, out there, he and Brad Raffensperger. You don't have to agree with everything they've done, certainly. But when the time has come, they said, this is where we stand.
It's interesting because in Florida has also been ordered to redraw its maps because they were prejudicial to African American voters. There were two amendments passed, Amendment 5 and 6, about 12 years ago now in Florida that said that no district may either advantage or disadvantage a minority group in the state. And been ignored completely since then. The federal courts have now said to the DeSantis administration, your map that you draw and take out of the hands of the legislature is unconstitutional. My understanding is, as of this afternoon, that DeSantis is telling the general counsel's office in the state of Florida to spend an unlimited amount of money to win this case. That he would make it happen. That they want to throw every lawyer under the sun at this case because they want to prove that they don't have to listen to the Voting Rights Act ever again, and that the federal court order to address a racial injustice in that is just woke politics. They want to kill it.
So, Joe, isn't that modern day nullification?
Sure.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, and that's what they are. That's and David Pepper talks about this, laboratories of autocracy, his book, but it's true.
Great
These
book.
states are out there, and they are the laboratories for snuffing this stuff out and getting control of the vote any way they can, gerrymandering or anything else. And when it works, the other states pick it up. And it's not going to, whether it's a week abortion ban or any of the other stuff that that you're seeing these states do. But fundamentally, I'm looking at Tuberville. I mean, here is sort of abuse of power where he's out there still the Marines have no commandant because this guy every military promotion he because he's the military's woke and isn't doing enough on abortion. I mean, it's just fundamentally undemocratic and crazy.
For national
The
security.
vote if they can. Yeah, exactly.
And harms military families, harms military readiness. Amy McGrath, former lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps, said, here's the thing. Getting an abortion in the military is not exactly an easy thing to do in the first place, right? So this idea that, that Tuberville's calling this, abortion tourism or whatever the case might be, is just ridiculous. This is an ideological move to show that, he can do this. And of course, none of his fellow senators will kick him in the rear end and tell him to get his act together. Okay, listen, let's move on. President Joe Biden. President Joe Biden is doing a good. He is a good president. He has helped unemployment to its lowest level. Inflation, while high, is leveling out. The stock market is growing. The United States is the only major developed economy in the world that is still growing. Russia and China are in trouble, both militarily on the Russian side, economically on the Chinese side. He is normal. He is decent. He does what a normal president is supposed to do, which is on behalf of the people all day, every day. And somehow, Stuart, that's not enough. But Donald Trump, 4 times indicted, 91 counts. Normal because it's Trump. But Joe Biden, not enough.
Yeah, this is the crisis that our journalist friends have. And it's how to deal with this moment. We talked about this a lot. That generations of these journalists were brought up with the greatest good was objectivity. That we've learned, like a lot of things in our society, based on good faith on both sides. That you would have some who would lie more than others. The government itself lied a lot in Vietnam, certainly, and other times. But there was some sense of accountability that objectivity was a goal. Now there is no object. How do you tell both sides of a lie? I mean, that is one of the reasons we started Resolute Square, and it's a complete failure of the journalist model that we have. And I think it is part of the lack of confidence that people have in the media. It's not just coming from the hard right. It is sort of a sense that what are they going to do? And they have to do more of exactly what you were talking about. They have to call lies lies. They just say this. Otherwise, you can't have any sort of civil society that has no agreed upon truth. You can't. It will not work. It will split, and it'll tear. And in a lot of ways, that's what's happening.
Yeah, and Rick, that's a good look. We've all spent hours, probably collectively days or weeks on the phone or in meetings with reporters,
Sure.
and we feel like that they, I think they want to write the right stories and write them correctly. I mean, we talked to a couple of reporters who had gone to dinner with strict, strategists the night before the Milwaukee debate a couple of weeks ago, even though he wasn't there. And I said, "What the hell were you doing there?" "Oh, well, when he invites you, you should go." "Well, why?" "Well, if his candidate's not going to bother to show up, so you can go drink his $500 bottles of wine, like, why go?"
Right. Well, look, the thing that will put this nation in its political grave is the curse of both-sidesism. Mm-hmm. And the curse, Stuart and you and Joe have all said, like the truth. So when the administration says, hey, inflation is down, employment is up, and then they go to the Republicans and say, but Republicans affirm, Republicans say that we live in a Mad Max hellscape of radioactive mutants eating the dead. Right. And then they treat those stories equivalently. I mean, there was a story the other day where Ron DeSantis refused to meet with Joe Biden after the hurricane hit Florida. And Biden won't meet with DeSantis.
Yeah, it's
but
crazy.
Did not clarify that it was because Ron DeSantis was throwing a pissy fit like a goddamn infant, stomping his boots on the floor and being a general jerk. There's an obsession in reporting right now that you have to treat both sides equally, and you have to value both sides the same way. One side of this is a pretty centrist Democrat, slightly left of center-left Democrat, doing a creditable and good job on the country. And the other side is a guy who goes on television and goes on interviews. Oh, yeah, when I'm back, I'll put people in jail. When I'm back, I'm going to burn down the Justice Department and the FBI. We're going to take over the government. We're going to fire everybody so our people run it. If you treat these people the same way, that's like saying, well, that Hitler fellow might be a bad egg, but you never quite know what those socialists will do. Insanity.
Now, yeah, and Joe, I think this is part of it too, which is, the president, I think, has done a good job in 2.5, almost 3 years. Legislative perspective, bipartisan wins, right? Even when the Democrats held the House narrowly, he couldn't have gotten these things done without some Republican votes in the House and some Republican votes in the United States Senate. And so it's, with like a crowd like No Labels, it's like, what the hell else do you want, right? You say you want decency, you say you want calm, you say you want calm politics, you say you want bipartisan work. Here you are. I mean, while the world is ridiculing Mitch McConnell for having another episode in front of a microphone, Joe Biden calls the guy. Is
Yeah.
anybody going to do that to Joe Biden? God forbid. No. But he's the guy
Oh,
who's the decent one, and somehow decency, calm, and competence, right, isn't currency enough anymore.
oh, well, first of all, I think it will be. I mean, I still think that's the contrast that in the end wins over those 200 or 300 people, and those are going to decide this. You know, one of the problems that the journalists have is they keep chasing the shiny object, whatever crazy
Right.
thing is going on, and not focused on, I think, what will the absolute contrast between Trump and MAGA, and that Biden character decency. A great example is Donald Trump. Anybody who joined the military, uh, they're losers and fools. And had that ceremony today, giving the Medal of Honor to a true hero who risked everything to save 4 lives in Vietnam, and I think 1963, I think it was. But it was, I mean, just that juxtaposition of the decency Biden had in that ceremony and his real reverence for
Yeah.
the military versus Trump, and who supports Putin. And I mean, it is. In the end, I believe that will be the decisive factor, as I believe it's why the contrast wave from hitting and in 2022 and turning into a red mirage. And I think it's the same contrast that we need to keep driving. It's yes. The other thing I think is that his economic, the Bidenomics, 6 months from now, we've got 14 months, 6 months, 9 months from now. Let's talk about it, because that's when, for sure, over the next 6 or 9 months, Americans are actually going to feel what it started 3, 4, 6 months ago. And it's going to be stronger. It always works that way. I keep going back, citing the Reagan coming out of massive inflation. It took 2.5 years. Right now, right now at the same point, he was in the toilet. Walter Mondale was 1 point behind Reagan. It was a dead heat right now at the same place. 6 months later, it was morning in America. People started to feel it, whether deserved or not. That's how this plays out. And I think in the end, it's the contrast and Biden's ability to get. By the way, he got all these done against the most the party that threw the most obstacles of any ever. I mean, he got more done in 2 years. The Republican Party, a MAGA cult that was doing everything it can to make him fail, everything,
Yep.
and he's still got the job done for the American people. That I think it'll be that contrast. I said all last cycle, crazy. We the work, we'll win this thing. But the crazy, I think, is starting to look really dangerous to a lot more people out there. We'll see, but I'm pretty
Well,
optimistic. Actually, it that work. That's the
right.
key thing. Is the work must be done.
So,
That's what we try to do here.
Stuart, just to extend on Joe's point for a second before we get to a little lightning round, Ohio, this ballot measure that was ostensibly designed to to kill a ballot measure that voters will see later in the year on reproductive rights gets crushed, the Republican-led effort. Just, I believe, this week or maybe late last week in Iowa, a Trump plus 56 county elects a Democratic, I believe, county auditor over a wacko MAGA person. We saw a Democrat get elected in Jacksonville, Florida. It was nonpartisan, but
Democrat.
Democrat aligned, elected in Colorado Springs, Colorado. We saw that crazy Joe Kent from Southwest Washington, lost last year. A competent, confident, normal Democrat should beat the man.
Yeah, this is our frustration party, that it won't rally behind Biden enough. I
Right.
mean, this is Joe
Yeah.
Biden. It's not a question, is Joe Biden perfect? Biden 40 years old. I mean, Joe Biden stands between us and this of anti-democratic forces. All that matters. I mean, it's like saying, well, I like Churchill, but the guy drinks too much. I mean, does it matter? No.
Works from bed too often.
I mean,
Right.
yeah. I mean,
Right.
you're like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, and or Maggie Thatcher. She's really not very nice. In these moments, it doesn't matter, and I don't know. Part of the great strength of the Democratic Party is its diversity. I mean, obviously, that's where the country's going. That's going to be its enduring thing. It is easier to message to Republicans, but still, there should be this effort among Democrats, and I hope it's going to happen, that they will now begin this process of elevating Biden. Biden is doing a pretty good job. They should say Biden is doing a great job. Use that as where you want to negotiate from. Let somebody else
Right.
just. And, I think that's one of the things that we've done in the Lincoln Project, we do at Resolute Square, is go out there and tell that truth.
Guys, before we let everybody go, Rick, what are you looking at that you think everybody else needs to see?
I am looking right now at they're going on inside the primary. I think we're going to see a couple more boomlets. Nikki's about to have her boomlet. Then the money that Larry Ellis is pumping in, Tim Scott will have his boomlet. But I'm watching very closely the clock, because if either Brian Kemp or Glenn Youngkin is going to 15th is the drop dead date, and I don't see a path for it, but I'm keeping an eye on all of it.
All right, Joe, how about you?
I'm kind of like Stuart brought up something today about Larry Hogan, and I found it really interesting that in Maryland, Maryland did a whole lot better under Biden in the economy and everything Biden's done than under Trump, and yet Larry Hogan's talking about both Trump and Biden are bad. What is wrong with Biden that he's upset about? And I actually think there's a chance he may back away from this no label stuff. And so I'm going to really watch that and see if we. I think that's a really interesting path to maybe make him answer those kinds of questions that Stuart was mentioning to me earlier today.
Rick?
Joe, that's interesting, because I did a book about called The Last Politician, about Biden. And you see over and over again how Joe Manchin betrays him and screws him over. And Biden keeps trying to make deals with the guy. But this is exactly where the no labels thing is. They can say they're one thing, but every time that you try to treat them like they're good faith actors, you get your throat cut.
Yep.
Stu, how about you?
Another thing I don't think we talk about enough is everything that party now that is negative. This sense of a world that doesn't really exist, a sense of anti-truth, a sense against diversity, a sense of being against women, a sense of rewriting history. This is all what is happening in Russia. And this is what the stakes are in Ukraine. And that is what Ukraine is fighting for. It is fighting really for our sense of what is the liberal world going to be like. And there is no coincidence that those who are the most anti-democratic are the ones who are supporting Putin. And I just don't think that we can raise the stakes of this high enough. And it's one area where I think Biden needs to do more. But this is an existential crisis for not just Ukraine, but for Western democracy.
Listen, guys, we have about 25 days of the government's fiscal year. Kevin McCarthy is out there making rumblings about the fact that he's going to proceedings against President Joe Biden. The wackos like Marjorie Taylor Greene, et cetera, are saying that they won't even a budget unless Biden is impeached. And I think about that in the context of all of this insanity about, Joe Biden weaponizing the state, when in fact we are seeing not only Kevin McCarthy and his ilk willing to potentially impeach Joe Biden, and government offline, which will hurt the economy. We've already heard from Rick about all of the things that Ron DeSantis is doing, everything else. So and all of the things that people like the Heritage Foundation and Trump himself have talked about.
Yep.
They claim, because projection is always their favorite thing, right, that Democrats, pro-democracy forces really are the boogeyman. They're the ones hiding under the bed, when in fact, Republicans can, have, and will weaponize the government for their own purposes to the detriment of individual Americans. And we shouldn't forget that. And I think that everything they do, right, of authoritarian, Biden shines a light on that. And I think they know that. And I think they know that normal will win. And that's why I think they'll do whatever it is they have to next year to try and beat us. So, all right. Always, thank you guys. Remember, That Trippy Show, the Enemies List podcast with Rick Wilson. Read all of Stuart's books, including the one about when he was a part-time amateur football player in Italy. Who knew these things even
Go
existed?
Lugano Seagulls!
Go Seagulls. And as always, gang, please tune into the Lincoln Project podcast. Thanks, everybody, and next week.
See you guys.
Thanks all.